Welcome, everyone, to this exciting Ignite session, Protecting Your as-a-Service, M365, and more. By way of as-a-service and cloud, according to ESG research, only 15% of people who needed to restore something were able to actually do a recovery of that data. Now, that specifically revolves around M365, but can you imagine, with all the differences in as-a-service offerings, what that statistic might look like for the rest of the options? It seems like we've got a lot of work to do in this space, so we're going to really uncover this today. My name is Teresa Miller, and I'm a principal technologist with Cohesity, and I'm joined by two very special industry expert guest speakers. And I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves.
So greetings, my name is J. Peter Berzizi. I'm an 8-time awarded Microsoft MVP, also an author, a journalist, a cybersecurity advisor, and a technical speaker. I'm also, between us, a licensed drone pilot, but that doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about today.
That's awesome.
And I'm Shannon Keene. I'm a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft. In my role, I spend a lot of time trying to demystify all of the sort of mysteries of Azure. So I spend time trying to make it make sense so that folks are able to adopt the cloud and be protected as well as secure.
This is going to be an exciting conversation today, and let's go ahead and dive in. The first question is just general SaaS application vendors. We have a lot of them out there. We have M365, Salesforce, there's databases, Box, Dropbox, etc. Do SaaS application vendors offer any form of data protection?
That's a good question. I can kick that one off. I guess the right answer is you hope so. But that's kind of the problem, isn't it? Hopefully that's not how you're assessing this, that you hope that they have data protection. And then in the middle of an emergency, you're wondering what that data protection is. Typically, you'd want to look at the SLAs. I know you're thinking, J. Peter, I really don't want to do that. But unless you look at the SLAs, unless you know what they are promising, because they're pretty straightforward, all of the different vendors out there, they tell you, they're not being duplicitous. Unless you do that, you won't know what they offer. And that's important because you don't want to wait till you're in the middle of an emergency before you find out what data protection they offer.
Yeah, and I think just to bolt on to that, a lot of customers and even personal individual users think of the cloud as this magical place, and I wish it was, right? It's infrastructure, and you have to know what your SLA is so you know exactly how you're protected in the event you ever need to recover data.
Awesome. So true. So let's take that question a step further. Shannon, why don't you kick off the answer to this one?
Sure.
So are there any similarities around data protection by way of SaaS application vendors? Is there an industry standard or anything that they have to follow?
I wish there was. I feel like at some point there probably should be, but again, we haven't evolved to that point in terms of our span of being technical in the cloud, right? So it really is vendor by vendor, and it's a matter of knowing what your vendor's actually protecting against. And it is inspecting the SLA and reading all of the user agreement documentation, right? Especially if you're protecting mission critical things like really important documents in terms of maybe something related to a legal situation you're in or something related to a financial transaction that's very important and you need to maintain records of that. If you're storing that in a cloud provider, you need to make sure you know what you're going up against in terms of what they're able to offer natively to you.
J. Peter, what do you think?
No, I couldn't agree more. I think that that pretty much nails the subject in that regard. And I think that that's where even though this may not be the kind of thing we want to think about every day of our life, we have to think about it at least at some point because we don't want to get caught in a problem. So I would say that's great advice.
Right.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, nobody wants to be the 85% of organizations that couldn't recover their data. Like we were talking about that. And I think that's a good way to segue into M365 because that's where that statistic lived. So Microsoft 365 specifically comes with what are referred to as native options. What can someone expect by way of these options with, Exchange Online, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams? Are they going to get full on backup and recovery with true SLAs that they know they can sleep well at night with? J. Peter, go ahead.
Well, so the answer is no. Let's be honest, there are retention policies in place that can tap into various features of each of those server solutions. So you're talking about server solutions that were on premises and moved to the cloud, like Exchange is now Exchange Online or SharePoint and so forth. And so the retention policies can tap in. Or in the case of Exchange Server, there are some deleted item retention time settings that you can configure. There are things like that that can help you with some form of data loss and recovery. But if you're thinking that there's a point in time restore, that Microsoft, if you have a problem, that you're just going to call Microsoft and they're going to restore this from a backup of some sort, that's not what's provided. And that's not even what's offered in the SLA. So you have to know that. And then you have to ask yourself, well, then is what's provided out of the box good enough for what I need going forward in the event there was a corruption or some type of attack or some type of need for recovery? And that's a question for each of you to answer yourselves.
I think what gets really difficult is the idea, again, going back to this whole notion of cloud seems magical, right? But the cloud is sort of a one size fits all for everyone. And every different business use case is going to be ever so slightly different. So it's really understanding your business needs, understanding your regulations, knowing exactly what you need and how long you need to hold it for. And then sort of matching it up with what do I get natively versus what could I potentially bolt on to this as a service offering to make that be a real true enterprise grade solution.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. Both of you very insightful, because the native options, even though they're policy, they're not backup. They may meet the needs and SLAs of many organizations. So taking a closer look at that, I think, is important. But there are going to be scenarios by which it's not going to meet those needs. I think probably more in the mid-sized to large organization. I think there's going to be some challenges where third party is probably going to need to be part of the conversation. So Peter, do you want to go ahead and maybe just share some thoughts on scenarios you've seen where third party can be helpful over and above the native options by way of M365?
Well, I think one of the things that has actually scared me when I saw it for the first time, I saw a demonstration of how an email could come in and it would be through M365, but it could encrypt your entire mailbox. And this was terrifying to think of, because we often think of a ransomware attack as something that affects our system, not our mailbox in the cloud. And when I saw this, my first thought was, okay, well, now what? What would you do if there's no point in time restore? Now, Microsoft has built-in native data protection. So that's fantastic for situations where there is a need for a failover to another server or site. But this won't help you in the event of one of these types of attacks. So again, I think because I'm somewhat of an old school IT admin, I think about having my own form of restore, having the ability through a third-party solution to restore in the event there was a problem of this sort. Because the last thing I would want to do is have to pay the ransom.
Right.
Just one example. Shannon, you might have others.
I think some of my examples follow suit from when I used to work for companies that were heavily regulated. And the native offerings don't allow the right amount of regulation time frame that you would need to be able to restore from or prove you're backing up from, right? So 7 years, you're not going to get that with the native tooling, unfortunately. And again, it's just the fact that Microsoft's using that whole idea of economies at scale, right? It's that one size fits all. It's not going to be individually thinking through each customer, right? Or each industry or each vertical. So it's a matter of trying to match up what those needs are and making sure you're picking the right third-party solution to sort of augment what you're doing with M365. Because I think all of us can agree here, the idea of that we're not managing SharePoint on-prem anymore, Exchange on-prem anymore, we're freeing up ourselves to do a lot more. But the idea here that gets a little tricky is we're sort of losing some of that control that we would just natively have on premises. So we have to augment it some way with a third-party solution.
Yeah, one of the other scenarios that jumps out at me, because by way of, let's say, Exchange Online, for example, I could put policy in place that would allow me to keep that data. It's like a legal hold, which is technically for governance and compliance reasons. But I think it goes back to something that you had mentioned, Jay Peter, around recovery SLAs. So sure, I can set a policy to kind of keep that data around, but how is it going to come out, in a period of time that's reasonable for the organization? So when I've run through the steps to pull that data out, for example, I've had it take hours just because the data set was too large. I've had it fail, had to run it again. And so imagine if I had to do that for multiple mailboxes. That's just one. So I think, and actually that actually goes back to something you said too, Shannon, right? The SLAs, those really, really matter. What do you each think about from a regulatory and compliance perspective and third party? Have either of you ever seen the data need to be stored even in another cloud or offsite? Is that something that's real and relevant to the larger enterprise?
Yeah, I have. I think that's where some of the regulatory guidance and documentation gets a little murky. I don't know if that's on purpose. So shame on you regulators. No, but the reality is, I think it's that way on purpose, because I think there's some level of interpretation, and a lot of customers, they decide to err on the side of caution, and they will have those backups be stored offsite somewhere else, right? So maybe it's a colo in the on-premises land. Maybe it's a couple different providers if you're thinking about it from cloud-based SaaS offerings.
And my focus has typically been the EU. So a lot of GDPR comes into play there, and where is your data and how secure is it? And can you do e-discovery over it? So compliance again comes into play. And I think the stress there is, you mentioned the legal hold scenario where, okay, it works. It will retain data. It is discoverable to a degree, but what does it do? It bloats your mailbox, depending on how your settings are. And that'll affect performance over time as your mailbox bloats. We would mostly agree that running email with a lean mailbox where your data is separate in a separate backup / archive scenario where you can do e-discovery over here, but your mailbox can run lean, that's typically the better way to run your email. But unfortunately, that's not the solution that's built in. So the built-in solution for Exchange Online is hold, in-place hold, legal hold, the same concept. Ultimately, it gets retained with the mailbox, which I think is somewhat of a mistake when you're in a world of serious compliance, enterprise-grade compliance, and you need to have a separate repository that you can then reach out to, and better e-discovery tools in that regard as well.
So what about SaaS, M365 or not? What about security? We see security in the news all the time. When I consider ransomware and OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams, how real is that risk? Like, what are you seeing out in the field on security prevention? Does that apply to this at all?
I think to some degree. I feel like the attacks are getting more and more sophisticated. I think there's a lot more social engineering these days, whether it be some email that's been dressed up to look like it's coming from your bank, or it's maybe even a text message. Sometimes I've seen that happen. So I've seen that more than just a straight piece of malware coming through. But again, that's what I've seen. I don't know, Jay Peter, have you seen anything different these days? I know things keep evolving and changing in this space quite a bit.
No, they are definitely. Microsoft is definitely evolving their security tools and getting stronger and better in that space. Remember, years ago, they didn't have an offering for security. And so to have that offering built in with EOP and then with Defender for 365, to see those tools evolving, it's great. I happen to be a believer in the defense in depth camp, which doesn't mean some say, oh, well, then just use all of the tools that Microsoft provides. That's defense in depth. Well, right. I kind of believe in having multiple vendors at play. So I love what Microsoft is doing. I really do. I see the advancements. But at the same time, with defense in depth, having different vendors in play, let's say where it becomes the most challenging, which is at the gateway, right? 90+% of all attacks start with some type of a phish. So if that is your biggest problem, then that's where you should focus. And so that's where I see third-party bolt-on solutions being very helpful there, as well as, of course, end user. I'm in the training world, so I think of enhancing the end user's ability to be a human firewall. So everything on that cyber kill chain to me is interesting, and I believe in using multiple vendors, obviously within reason and cost, concerns in play. But I believe in adding multiple vendors to the mix.
Yeah, I think that's true, because while security risks of some kind could impact, say, that OneDrive data, if there's something you could have done to prevent it and keep it from getting there, I think those steps really go a long way. And the data protection side of this, the backup and recovery side of this, hopefully is almost like the last thing you need to do. Hopefully you were able to stop it before it even got there. All right. So by way of today's session, I'm going to just ask each of you to maybe just share some parting wisdom and thoughts on this topic with the audience. Shannon, do you want to share something, a key takeaway?
Sure. The cloud, while it seems magical, it's not magic. So remember to take a look at your vendors and to really scrutinize that SLA, because that's really what's going to help you out in the event something comes crumbling down, right? You can never predict when that's going to happen. We can't predict the future. So you have to protect yourself as best as possible. And that's usually making sure that you do a full analysis of the SLAs that your vendors are providing so that you know exactly what you need in order to augment what that service is doing for you natively.
Excellent advice. Jay Peter, what do you think?
I would agree 100%. I would add that thinking about built-in versus bolt-on, it's nice to have everything built in. We like that. It's easy. It's convenient. And for the most part, Microsoft has done an amazing job of building in almost everything that we need. But there are still gaps, and we need to look to fill those gaps. There's gaps with regard to backup and recovery, with regard to security at times, archive and e-discovery, monitoring. So these are all areas where it's okay. It's okay to say that there are gaps there. With on-premises servers, there were always gaps, and we filled them with this ecosystem set of solutions that helped to enhance what Microsoft provided out of the box. Well, with the cloud, it's the same thing. It's an amazing suite of solutions. It's okay to say, hey, I would like to enhance these solutions with some third-party bolt-ons that give me a little bit more peace of mind, give me a little bit more control, which we sort of like and need at times in order to sleep at night. And it's okay to say that and to look for those solutions that are going to give us what we need.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today to share your thoughts on this topic.
Sure.
It's great to be with you.
Yeah. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. And thanks to everyone who joined our session here at Ignite today.